to Combat Mission. I've been asked by UK Fight Club to make this video in order to show how the combat mission simulation could be used as a military training aid. And to do that, we're going to build on exercise Eagle Strike. Eagle Strike is a tactical exercise without troops, which has the intent of further developing potential leaders in the combat estimate. TEWTs are a fantastic training tool. The participants receive their orders, observe a chunk of terrain, and then propose a plan to achieve their mission. It's rare that TEWTs actually go all the way through to some sort of execution though, so what we're going to do here is take a course of action and play it out using Combat Mission. There is one important caveat to bear in mind before we dive in. This is the commercial off-the-shelf game Combat Mission Shock Force 2, which is set in a hypothetical 2008 NATO invasion of Syria. So the tables of organisation and equipment reflect the British Army in 2008, and the terrain uses Combat Mission's Middle Eastern arid tile set. Combat Mission Professional, which is in use with the STL amongst others, has a more updated British Army and the temperate tile set, which looks a lot more like Camberley, or for example Eastern Europe. On to the exercise then. We're using the date caucus here, so the enemy are the Zabzimek armed forces. The briefing indicates that they have established two hasty section strength defensive positions in our area of operations, objectives Eagle and Buzzard, and that they are supported by a single BTR-80 and some 82mm mortars. Our force here is a standard British light infantry company with 2 javelin posts and 3 GPMGs in support, plus 81mm mortars and 105mm light guns on call, with which we need to destroy and clear the enemy by sequential attacks. The focus of the TEWT is one platoon's attack on Objective Eagle, so although we have all these forces at our disposal, we're going to be concentrating on one platoon's component of the mission and the assets supporting that. Sitting the camera down on top of Saddleback Hill and working with the OS map from the briefing, it's pretty clear that there are 3 broad avenues of approach: left, centre and right. My 2 main concerns are minimising the exposure of my platoon to observation as they advance, especially to reduce the threat posed by the enemy's mortars, and crossing the obstacle posed by Wishmore Bottom. So I'm favouring the right-hand avenue of approach for one platoon. There is plenty of concealment on either side of Wishmore Bottom, and the approach to Objective Eagle passes through the woods, which means I can not only hopefully surprise the enemy and avoid the open ground in front of the objective, a likely enemy kill zone, but ease coordination with my fire support. The natural site for the company's GPMGs seems to be the top of Saddleback Hill, from where they will be supporting my right-hand approach on Objective Eagle at about 90 degrees. This should allow them to continue putting direct fire into enemy positions right up until the moment one platoon makes its assault. With the course of action outlined, we can get on to the actual execution. The first thing to do is to get one platoon down from its starting position to its first RV behind the right shoulder of Saddleback Hill, and bring the GPMGs and javelins up to the crest so they're on hand to provide support. There's a small recce team already up there, keeping the objectives under observation, and they've spotted the enemy BTR. In Combat Mission, enemy units do not appear on the map unless they are being observed by friendly units and have been positively identified. Spotting is also relative. Just because the recce team has spotted the BTR doesn't mean the BTR has spotted the recce team, which is good. The BTR is armed with a 14.5mm heavy machine gun, which has the range to be a problem. One platoon's route involves covering the open ground between the shoulder of Saddleback Hill and the nearest woods, and the BTR could engage them there. So, up goes one of the javelin teams. Combat Mission accurately models the effects and characteristics of weapons, vehicles and other hardware. This is a platoon leader oriented exercise, not an anti-tank platoon exercise, so we don't need to worry too much about the details of how a javelin missile and a BTR might interact. Suffice to say that it doesn't end well for the BTR. With the immediate threat of the BTR out of the way, I can start moving one platoon forward. To do this, I'm splitting the sections into fire teams, running them across the open ground, and then reorganising them on the other side. Naturally, this takes a while, and because the player in Combat Mission controls all the units on their side, it involves a lot of micromanagement. One way to sidestep this in a classroom environment is to cut out this kind of approach march. So for example, if we knew we were going to be focusing on the right-hand avenue of approach, we could create a variation of the scenario where one platoon starts further along its route. Jumping forward to the point where one platoon has entered the woods on the other side of Wishmore Bottom, I can start moving them forward onto the flank of Objective Eagle. This has some advantages and disadvantages. The woods make it easier to approach unseen, but increase the chance of bumping into the enemy at close range. At this point, I don't know exactly where the enemy is, and while I might find out the hard way, I think that's a preferable risk to run compared to being out in the open. As a result, I actually make contact with the first enemy position at about 40 meters. Playing combat mission in the turn-based mode means the player can only issue orders at the end of every minute-long turn. Here, the enemy opens fire just at the start of a turn, so I have no control over the first minute of contact, and it's the tactical AI for the soldiers that's running the show. One section's B team comes under fire, spots and identifies an enemy soldier up ahead, returns fire, but is then hit with an RPG. This incapacitates the section's gunner, he's now a casualty, and heavily suppresses the fire team, so they stop firing and keep their heads down. This has also affected the fire teams on either side, who can't see the enemy yet, but know that the platoon has been engaged. After about 30 seconds, they recover and continue returning fire. By the end of the turn, it looks like the enemy are now keeping their heads down, and I'm winning the firefight. This is a key component of combat mission. Firefights are not modelled purely as an interaction of weapon systems. The human factor also has significant weight. Soldiers on the map will do their best to follow orders, but they all have a point at which self-preservation takes over, whether that involves taking cover, becoming suppressed or pinned down, or breaking and attempting to flee. Although the enemy is now suppressed, I don't want to assault the position just yet. There are two more other enemy positions to worry about as well, which might be able to mutually support this one. I can bring the GPMGs to bear though. I'd been holding fire with these until I made contact, because while the top of Saddleback Hill gives my fire support a good view over Objective Eagle, it's also very exposed, and I didn't want to attract the attention of the enemy's mortars. Now the cat is out of the bag, and they can open up. Because of the battlefield geometry, they can engage the enemy positions in Objective Eagle without restricting the actions of one platoon. To mitigate the threat of enemy positions in depth, I also start calling the light guns in on the tree line behind Objective Buzzard, which is a pre-registered target. With the position on the other side of the road engaged, it's hard to tell if the occupants of those foxholes have been suppressed. I leave 3 section to watch the foxholes just up ahead, and with 2 section watching the open ground on my right, push 1 section up the edge of the woods towards the 3rd enemy position. 1 section's B team again comes under fire. The enemy position across the road is a lot less suppressed than I thought, mostly because the soldiers there have left their foxhole. I suffer another casualty, but 1 section's A team is able to carry on and close with the enemy to their front. This consists of rushing forward while the GPMGs suppress the position, then opening up at close range once they can see the foxholes. The enemy tries to flee, unsuccessfully, but the fire team continues engaging the position and lobbing hand grenades in, just in case. On the next turn, they move up and occupy the foxholes, followed by 3 section occupying the enemy's now clear 1st position. While this has all been going on, the enemy has tried to engage the GPMGs on Saddleback Hill with his 82mm mortars. He hasn't pre-registered the hill for fire though, and has had to go through the process of spotting and adjustment. Luckily for me, the light guns firing on the tree line up at Objective Buzzard appear to have incapacitated the enemy platoon leader making the call for fire before it's been properly corrected, and after a little while, the enemy fire mission comes down off target. There's still the enemy position on the other side of the road to deal with before Objective Eagle is clear. 2 platoon is coming up on 1 platoon's right flank on its way to Objective Buzzard, which frees up 1 platoon's 2 section to throw on an attack supported by the rest of the platoon, now occupying the cleared foxholes in the woods, and the GPMGs. This goes off smoothly. Though the surviving enemy are in some dead ground behind their position where they're not being effectively suppressed, there's only 1 left, and he's quickly dealt with. With that, we've completed our execute of exercise Eagle Strike. Objective Eagle is clear and the enemy section there has been destroyed. I've taken 2 casualties in the process, both of these are wounded. Combat Mission doesn't have in-depth simulation of casualty procedures, but the AI soldiers can perform immediate battlefield first aid on casualties. If we compare the planning to the execution, we can generate a number of discussion points. Was approaching through the woods worth the risk of trying to win certain firefights at close range? Did the platoon actually conduct a platoon attack, or did it conduct a fragmented series of isolated section attacks? In Combat Mission, the player can issue orders to each unit unless they're out of action or panicking. What would be the practical difficulties of controlling this fight in the woods? What kind of orders should the platoon leader be issuing? Where should they locate themselves to understand what's actually happening? Did this plan make the best use of the available support? None of the mortars or light guns were fired on Objective Eagle. Was it right to focus them on the enemy's depth instead? Were the GPMGs actually effective in suppressing the enemy from Saddleback Hill, or should they have been set up much closer? And of course, because this is a simulation, we can save the scenario at different points as we go along and go back to run through it again with different decisions. Or, with the replay function of Combat Mission Professional, we can easily move backwards and forwards through the battle and focus on different areas, units and times. For instance, we can run the scenario again and attack straight up the middle, bringing the GPMGs down to the tree line where their supporting fire is much more effective, and screening one platoon's crossing of Wishmore Bottom with a smoke screen from the light guns. Here, the platoon is able to maximise its fire in a way that it couldn't when fighting from the wood, allowing the 3 enemy positions to be cleared about 15 minutes faster and without suffering any casualties, despite attacking across the open ground. In a similar vein, we can flip the exercise and red team it. We can play it out from the perspective of the enemy, whether that is against programmed in blue COAs or against a human opponent. We could also use the scenario editor to change up elements of the scenario. We could take the GPMG teams out and replace them with HMGs or GMGs mounted on jackals. We could change the time of day and weather and have a night attack in the rain. We could give the enemy a well-trained forward observer and put them in a good OP to increase the threat from indirect fires. All of these variations are likely to change how the scenario plays out. Or we could wipe the slate clean and throw something completely different together. We can create whatever kind of scenario we like to focus down certain teaching points or provoke discussions. This is why we think that Combat Mission is an effective training medium as part of a comprehensive professional military education. It represents an intermediate step between TEWTs and field exercises, a simulated battlefield where courses of action and planning decisions can be played out and explored without the restrictions and commitments associated with getting out onto a training area. Hope you found this useful and informative. Thank you for watching.